The next item of business, we have challenge of agenda item 9, the challenge of a registered person to vote. We had Mr. J.D. Moorhead has submitted to this board a number of challenges to 241 to be exact, which was sometime last week. Is Mr. Moorhead here?
Yes, I'm right here, sir. Thank you.
We're going to do, we got a letter from you. I know our staff put these together. We'll hear it, okay? We're going to hear from staff. I think Mr. Livingston, you're here to speak on this matter also specifically.
Actually, I'm here to speak on the previous matter.
Oh,
If it would be more appropriate.
it says voter registration challenge.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, it was actually more to do with what you just discussed.
Well, I'm gonna hear from you, okay? We're gonna hear from you on that, because we do, and I know Mr. Robbins provided some information. We're gonna get on this next agenda. Okay, Mr. Moorhead, can I summarize where you're at?
Yes, mainly what I am is I'm a messenger. And what I did was, there are many people throughout the state that are working on True the Vote, and they have been looking at everything from their aspect. And what we're trying to do here is actually, we want to convey that the research is not intended to disenfranchise any voter, but to help the Board of Elections and the voters by bringing inconsistencies to the attention of the Board of Elections. We want every voter information to be accurate and county voter rolls maintained. We realized that early this year that Ohio has been in the press for many voters. In some counties, that population had more voters in some counties than population. Currently, the state of Ohio is being sued by Judicial Watch for this situation. In view of what you've looked at and just listened to prior to me, what you're seeing here is that there are a lot of people very interested in how everything is done, and it's done absolutely accurately and very concise. In this area, what we did, the effort in here is through the Ohio Voter Integrity Project. It's a grassroots citizen initiative whose goal for elections to remain free, to have elections free and fair. Now, voters who have been identified and be further researched we research all of these, and to say this, there are many people throughout the state, and each of those receive training. They are shown how to do this, and this came in from the state of Texas, and it's moving through different states. We've had meetings with people from Texas, and the information has been brought to us, and we disseminate it over the state of Ohio. Many of those people are then trained, and it's a very intense training, and they have to be very careful with everything that they do. And then after all of that, once they make a decision in any area where they'd like to challenge something, those are all returned to the research area. People that are in the research area are much more careful and look at everything, you know how to do everything, they're very well trained. And then we look at the numbers, and we do not want to submit volume to you. What we want to do is submit the quality of what we've been looking at, so that you can consider them, and then you can give us your determination as to what you'd like to do about them. So that's just about all I have to say about that. There was some discussion earlier about the form 259. Is it a correct form? And yes, it is a correct form. And I'll reference that by page 4, section 2 of the Secretary of State's directive dated August 2nd, 2012. And beyond that part, I can go into more on how we do it if you wish. And we have some numbers here. And I was more interested, I think, in finding out what your decision was on what we submitted. Because as of last Wednesday, when I submitted them, I was told that there would probably be no way that we could possibly be at this meeting.
Well, we have it at this meeting, and we have boxes with all your documents, and I know our staff has been working vigorously on this matter. Brought to their attention, Mr. Moore, among the many other things they're doing to get ready for the presidential election.
Yes.
And you're certainly well within your right to bring challenges as the code allows. I know I'm going to defer to Jane and Pat now, and we have our legal counsel also present to give us their thoughts about this, and I'm sure probably maybe to have you answer some questions then too, okay?
I'll try to my best abilities. Thank you.
Chairman, we are going to refer to Directive 2012-30, which is the pre-election voter challenges, and it lays out this process by which we should follow if we do get voter challenges. So briefly, on page 4 of that, challenges filed pursuant to revised code 350519. The first step in the process is that the director or deputy director must complete an initial review to determine that a facially sufficient application or challenge has been filed. We do believe that this has been sufficiently filed. Mr. Moorhead is an elector of Cuyahoga County and has submitted the appropriate paperwork on the paperwork identified by the directive. He submitted his paperwork on Form 259 from the Secretary of State's office. The next portion that we were to go through for the process was to review the reasons for the challenge on each document for each of the voters that's being challenged. So,
Excuse me, Jane, so that is, does the challenge state sufficient grounds for the
yes,
challenge? Is that the third step?
that's the third step. So actually, Mr. Moorhead had very efficiently categorized each of the challenges in his letter and filed the challenges according to those categories. So unless and until you want to talk about specific records, I'm going to go through each of the categories that Pat and I reviewed together today with Reno Ordini, our legal counsel. The first of the challenges is 122 challenges of voters who did not have apartment buildings or building unit names included in their registration cards. The issue of whether or not an apartment or building identifier is required to make the address complete, we believe, is not an issue. We have 122 records being challenged. When they registered, we are required to send them what's referred to as a voter location notification card. That card has on it all the district information, the polling location information, and if those cards are returned to us, and this is the purpose of that mailing for new registrations, if those cards are returned to us, we have to confirm their address, and we send a confirmation card in order to do that. Of the 122 voters listed, only 2 of the voter location notification cards were returned to us. So in our system, we have the rest of the 120 voters as being active valid voters, regardless of whether or not there was a dorm room, a building identifier, or an apartment number. The other 2 had then gone into the polling location in an election and voted provisional ballots. Those 2 provisional ballots were then reviewed, and they were valid ballots. We confirmed their address with those ballots, ballot envelopes, and those votes counted. So those persons are now active valid voters with complete registrations. Just to give you an idea, because we did go through each record, I'm going to give you an update on the other items that we found while we were reviewing. 8 registrations did have apartment numbers included on their original registration card. The operator did not put the the apartment number into the system at the time of data entry. We have since updated those records to include the apartment number. 3 voters updated their records to a new address in 2012. And then the last were the 2 that went in and voted provisionals, so their records were updated as being active voters as well. We don't consider those addresses being incomplete. We've been able to verify those addresses, so our recommendation is that these persons remain on the voter rolls.
Have you, Mr. Moore, seen a copy of this letter yet? Or this
No.
summary that you provided?
No.
Okay. Why don't you provide it?
Yep.
Okay, Mr. Moore, what's just simply going on at this point is, as you can see, our staff has reviewed each and every record, kind of setting forth their position on this matter, and we're just listening to that at this point, okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to add it here is that what we were told is that always include application's room number, floor numbers, suite, apartment number, etc. And so when those were not available, were not on there, then we had a question about it. If you've done that, we feel comfortable with all of those, they've been verified, we're satisfied.
Thank you, sir. What's the next one, Jane?
The next 5 challenges were deceased voters. We've been able to resolve 4 of the 5 records that were submitted. We did have, the only way that we are allowed to remove voters off of the registration rolls is if we have notice from the Ohio Department of Health or a municipal Department of Health telling us that those voters have died. There's a process now by which we get those records directly from the Secretary of State's office, and prior to that, since 2009, we had a relationship with the Ohio Department of Health in order to remove deceased voters. 2 of the voters were on those lists from prior. They were missed when we were processing those lists. We have since gone back and removed those 2 voters who did show up on those lists. The other 2 voters were duplicate records. So when we got notice from ODH, we took off of the registration list 1 of the records for each of them, not realizing there were 2 duplicates. So we have since resolved those and removed those 2 voters as well. And we have 1 voter that we were unable to locate on the ODH or Secretary of State recent files that are referred to as Steve. And we have contacted ODH to try and get confirmation on that voter status. And once we do, if they tell us that that person is deceased, we will remove them from the voter rolls.
So we followed up, Mr. Moorhead, I think you've identified.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think we're a little at disadvantage because all we're allowed to do as a blind area is we look at it at the year. You're allowed to look at month, day, year, so perhaps you found things that we could not determine, but thank you.
The director's referring to page 2 of the letter you have.
So in other words, the other deaths that were challenged, we agreed with you and removed them from the rolls. We're waiting to hear about 1 person.
Good, thank you, sir.
Item C is records for persons who are registered at the Virgil Brown Employment and Family Services Building at 1641 Kane Avenue.
Well, excuse me, Jane, just so to fairly, there are 21 challenges, and they're challenging that they're registered as commercial or business property.
Right, yes.
Which, and that property is actually what?
That property is actually the Virgil Brown Building, which is the county's Employment and Family Services Building.
Okay.
Most of the 21 voters who are registered at that address were registered in the early 1990s. That building actually was built and opened in 1991. I don't recall the number of the 21, but some of them also were registered at that building in 2008 also. None of the voters identified have voted. But 14 of the 21 have signed petitions. 20 of the 21 voters who are listed at that address are scheduled to be canceled in the 2013 National Change of Address process. So they haven't had any voter activity so far since 2009.
So they won't vote this time, is that correct?
Well, no, if they vote this time, they would still be in the poll book at that address. This is a unique situation because we do not have any commercial addresses in our, I shouldn't say any, but we don't have commercial addresses by practice in our voter registration system. So if you tried to register to vote at the Board of Elections address, it would come up as an invalid address. At some point, though, long before any of us were on the Board of Elections or here, there was an exception made for this address. And I talked to Joe Gauntner, who was the former director of the welfare department back in the 90s, actually. And he said that there was accommodations made for their address to be used by persons to receive their public assistance checks, as well as they would use that address for their voting address. There's a lot of social service agencies in that area, and at the time there were a couple of homeless drop-in centers in that area. So he explained to me, because my question was how did it ever get in our system to be an acceptable address? So regardless of all that, though, the bottom line is that Pat and I believe that they should be allowed to remain on the voter list. 20 of the 21 of them, if they do not vote or sign a petition between now and the summer of 2013, when the NCOA cancellation process is completed, will be removed. And we need to, going forward, identify this property as a commercial address.
So, based on Mr. Moorhead's challenge, there's some changes that are going to take place. We've identified an area, but your recommendation is not to cancel these individuals just yet.
Right, because they have been on the voter registration list at that address for so long, some of them having at least signed petitions as voter activity, and they're, like I said, they're in the process that National Voter Registration Act protects people from, which is you have to have a certain amount of time before you can remove them.
It would also limit their ability to vote provisionally if they should show up, because they have to give an address, identification. It's not going to be this address, correct?
You mean if we took them off?
Right. If you were to eliminate them and they showed up on election day, they couldn't vote because they're not registered to vote.
Or they would be able to vote a provisional ballot, but it wouldn't be counted because we would have canceled their registration.
But by leaving them on here, they could show up to the polling location and be located near this commercial establishment.
Yes.
Have to show some ID and an address, and they could vote provisionally, and if we could verify, it would be a change of address almost that they're presenting.
Right, and actually, we will put them in the poll book with a notation that says verify address, so that the poll workers will get certification or confirmation of their current address on election day if they do show up.
So what about homeless people that put a homeless shelter as their residence?
We take those addresses as a residential address for those persons.
For that purpose?
Yes. We got a registration card already. This is off the subject a little bit, but just to that point, we got a registration this year for an area of registered voter for South Marginal and East 55th Street. And so the NEOC case allows for those types of addresses to also be used.
Do we know of any other locations like Georgia Brown Center where this might be an issue, or?
I haven't gotten to the point where we asked Cnty to review to see if there are any other commercial buildings in there. We actually went through a process like when we first started in 2007 or 2008 where we we did a scouring, we scoured our registration list for commercial addresses, we removed them, but because this had traditionally been an address where they were allowed to register from, it remained in the system.
But that's not the case going forward.
No, once we get it cleaned up and we're not.
Will we notify these people to that effect? It seems as if, given the past practice, it would be appropriate to give them some sort of notice.
We did send notification to them when we started the NCOA process in 2009, and by law, that's the notice that we have to send prior to starting them on the timeline to cancellation if they don't have activity. So we did send them a notice.
But that's a little different issue than.
It's being sent to that building.
Okay.
So the
They
status,
don't have any contact.
right, and the status of those mailings has been tracked and it's on your spreadsheet.
That's it, sounds like that's.
As to Ina Joe's point, it might be good to work with that agency to post some notice saying if you're registered here to vote, it's no longer going to work. I mean, given that apparently you told people, not we, this agency, but the government told people they could use that address as a place to vote and haven't even to vote at that place as an address.
We will definitely have conversations with the county representatives over there about that, definitely.
The next item on
The next two duplicate records, we were able to research and.
Could we just step back 1 second? Was there
Yes, Mr.
a nursing home that was on Carnegie Avenue that was looked into?
That's
was
the last challenge, that's part of the 91 challenges,
sorry.
and we're gonna get to those just in 1 second. Okay, so the two challenge duplicate records, they were duplicates, we've resolved them. One was resolved in January, and one was resolved as a result of getting this protest.
Okay, thank you. And then on to item E.
The 91 challenges of voters who have moved or are no longer living at the voter registration address as their permanent residence. We looked at those, and there are categories of addresses. For example, 8800 Carnegie is, according to Mr. Moorhead, and we did not go by there to look at it to see, but it's a former nursing home where it closed, according to Mr. Moorhead, and then the residents were moved to other facilities. There's also a category of this challenge where there were persons involved in the Cleveland Job Corps program where they're allowed to live in a facility for a 12-month period and then they move out once their program is over. I believe that's the category where he said he spoke to the secretary and said that they don't live there anymore. And then there is,
I can call on them.
oh yes, door rooms, for example, at Cleveland State, where I believe the belief is that the students have moved on, they don't live there any longer. So this is the category I believe that Pat and I agree that fits into the National Voter Rights Act protection of the process, national change of address process, where a voter has 2 federal election cycles, 4-year period, to notify us of a changed address. And some of these folks are already involved in that process. They're already on the clock in terms of being canceled in the future. But it's not dissimilar to those persons at the Virgil Brown building. If we take them off now, there's no opportunity for them to go into another precinct or their new precinct and vote provisionally for this election. So unless they change their address with us prior to the November election with a registration card, they do have that opportunity right now. So I think that with the NCOA process, these folks, as everyone else who moves and doesn't tell us that they've moved, will be flushed out and canceled if they don't have voter activity. So we recommend keeping these persons on the rolls at this point.
To use the example that Mr. Moorhead is, this is a Cleveland Rehabilitation Special Care Center, is the nursing home that was closed down and moved.
Yes, I don't have confirmation of that, but I believe Mr. Moorhead is.
So these people, they have to vote at a location, polling location near the Cleveland Rehabilitation, if they wanted to vote.
If they,
Well,
you know,
could
they
go
would,
to another nursing home.
wherever they have moved
We could go
to,
find them.
or wherever they live now.
Hear me out.
Sorry.
So if they go to vote, they're gonna, the only notice they have is that they could vote at this location near this nursing home that they've been moved from. You'd agree? That's where they're registered to vote, correct?
They're registered to vote at that address, yes.
Right. So if they've moved, they're gonna have to, they go to the new polling location that they reside there, and they'll be said, you're not in the books, you need to go down here and vote.
They would vote a provisional ballot.
Right, they vote a provisional
Right.
ballot. So it's the same scenario as the Virgil Brown Center, if you cancel one, they couldn't vote because they wouldn't be registered.
Right. And now often, not because the facility closes, but for other reasons, we have a program where we by law go out to nursing homes and vote residents of nursing homes. And it's sometimes the case where they may be moving from their home into the nursing home or from another facility in the nursing home. And we do vote them provisionally in the nursing home. So the provisional ballot rules carry into even these facilities.
And so if they're in a new nursing home, they would vote a provisional ballot and also fill out effectively a change of address for that nursing home.
Right, that's what's on the provisional ballot in order to do that,
And
yes.
then we would count that ballot,
Correct.
okay? As opposed to canceling all these people just because they moved to a different nursing home and deny them the right to vote.
Correct. And anyone on this list that had a piece of mail that was returned to us from the March information card, we recently, if we got notice on those March cards that were returned to us that there was a forwarding in-county address, we have sent letters and a new registration card to anyone who had that returned to us. So hopefully if they don't get caught in that process, we'll still be able to protect them from the NCOA process, with the NCOA process.
Thank you, Jane. Mr. Moore, did you understand where we're at?
Yes, I was trying to understand it. It's a little beyond what I'm usually thinking about. But thank you. I think you satisfied the areas and all that situation. We were concerned if it's closed, where did they go? And if they go, how are they going to vote on that address if it's closed? And since you're answering those questions, I think it's sufficient.
Thank you for, we did update our records quite a bit with, as a result of the request, and appreciate that. And thank you for coming down and waiting.
Well, I would like to thank all of you for your time and effort you put into it, and I'll go back and thank all those that worked on it.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item of business would be, we have a comment from Mr. Livingston. Thank you for waiting, Mr. Livingston. You want to speak on the voter registration challenges?
Thank you. Members of the board, I'm here in a representative capacity. I'm the legal counsel for Northeast Ohio Voter Advocates, which is a similar third-party registration organization. It's nonprofit and nonpartisan, and it attempts to register voters in Cuyahoga County, particularly who are from underregistered